Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Double One Radio Gamescast, episode number 52. We've made it a full year, which means we've got some actual production behind the show, including a brand new set. As much of a set as we can.
Oh my god!
This is also the April Fool's episode, which means this is going to be a nightmare.
Yeah, we have so many moving parts, and I'm sure all of them, as you can tell already, are working perfectly.
From the 18-minute late start.
Not a single hitch in the plan. It's all
no
perfect.
hitches whatsoever.
Claude was late getting to the episode. We had to wait for him to get here.
Yeah,
it's all his fault.
At least he's very beautiful. Our 5-person show. So as always, I'm your host Ryan, and I'm joined by my lovely cohort of co-hosts, Brett.
Hello.
Alex.
I'm over here now.
Wyatt's like down there somewhere. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm here, I guess.
You're just in the room.
Good.
So
I exist.
You know, we're going to get started with the actual episode topics. We're ignoring the news today because, I don't know, we're more fun than the news. So, episode 52. This is the finale of season 1 of the Gamescast, everyone. I hope everyone's aware. This is our finale episode. We're going out on a bang, and by going out, I mean we'll be back next week doing the exact same thing.
No breaks.
So we are renewed for a second season. That's good.
Oh yeah, we're renewed for a second season. The production budget of like 2 pennies came in.
It is a Netflix original, which means that they never will ever cancel our show for any reason whatsoever.
Yes. We've got at least 18 seasons coming. So.
Oh yeah.
Wait, I thought the Netflix treatment was 2 seasons and done.
That was the April Fool's joke, Alex.
Oh.
Such a great start to this show. We're going to be talking about sequels, and only the good sequels and follow-ups to things, because there's no way that anything we do on this show can be bad. So we're only going to talk about good things. Which means inevitably, next episode will probably be about all the bad follow-ups that the show will become.
I'm sorry. We can't We cannot ignore Alex's giant joke.
I think we most certainly can. All right, we're having far too much fun, which means
are we
need
just
to
not
stop.
going to talk about that at all? Like
no.
What will we say?
One giant jug, Wyatt. I just have a cap here that I'm floating. That I can't take off the... Nothing. I have nothing here.
All right. Shenanigans aside, we have a podcast planned today, like an actual podcast episode. It's going to be action-packed. We hired Keanu Reeves to do some stunts. Not really. We don't have that much money. Although, no, maybe he'd be game. Maybe someone should send an email to Keanu Reeves and be like, you want to do some stunts for our episode.
He says he's willing to do one sick kickflip.
Yeah.
One sick kickflip. All right, good to know. We'll keep that in the back end for some future endeavors. But yeah, so speaking of sequels, we have a running game on this show that we've been doing for quite a while. It's been going for, some would argue, far too long. In fact, most would argue far too long. But that means we gotta kick it up a notch. We have to be fully ready for the absolute crap fest that's about to happen. So, for those not aware, the finalist Final Fantasy arc has been running in this show for the past few, almost months at this point. We've been creating character arcs for these characters from Final Fantasy games, the side characters that people generally don't know much about, so that way we can kind of have like fun with their story and whatnot. And we're going to do the final part, but of course, we're going to reveal, before we do the final part, we're going to have everyone show the story that they've already set up, so we are all in the loop for the final arc. And then we're going to react and see what happens, and then compare and contrast with the actual usage of those characters in their respective games. Which means slight spoilers for like minor characters in Final Fantasy XIV and Final Fantasy VII. Very slight. None of these characters are too important to the main plot, so you're not going to learn any spoilers about the main plots, but side character stuff might happen. So I hope you're all ready, because we're just going to get into this. We've got a 7-minute video of the past of this show that we're gonna start. So I'm gonna switch us over to our new group reaction stream format.
Reaction
pop up. I need to actually enable the video. So, see, this is the technical difficulties. We'll just give it 30 seconds. No, I put it on the wrong side.
Here's where it all falls apart.
It's working.
Not before at all.
Which means we're gonna do this in 5. You ready, Brett? On your end?
Yes, I am. I'm hovering over the play button, baby.
4, 3, 2, 1.
Okay, so what it looks like here is you're meeting this character in a very haunted mansion or at the end of a very suspect dungeon here, and there's no loot or anything. She's just sitting in the corner.
I see why it's looking just straight
with all these creepy.
This one still images
dolls.
Is very ominous.
It says everything.
And she looks very calm. And not like she's being haunted or anything. Maybe like she's doing the haunting. She might be a ghost. Maybe not. Maybe. Who knows if she's dead? She's here right now. But oh boy,
20 seconds left.
Oh god. So I think there's going to be one side quest for each of these dolls, and there's a certain item you need to get. What you don't know is these items are something significant to
Alex is ready to die over there.
Creating a ritual of some sort that she wants to.
It's because hearing your own voice,
not
man,
telling you everything
sucks.
else.
Oh, it's horrible.
She is part of a pastel steampunk cult. That is a series of words.
The complication here was that a second character was added that's involved in the story.
You know what? I'm thinking after all the dolls have been released from their demonic bonds, Ibarella is going to want to go on maybe some sort of a shopping trip, and this is this character has a doctorate in fashion. There's going to be probably some material gathering for a very special outfit that's going to be cool, and maybe gives people bonuses to fighting abilities and things like that you can get after you complete this part of her quest.
Okay. What else? What's the lead up to the conclusion?
Doctorate in fashion. I think it might involve said doctor as well. Maybe there is an introduction to maybe a clothing workshop. That's a dungeon that you need to clear out, something like that with evil clothing.
Okay, I see.
These boots were made for stomping.
All right, so the main party in Final Fantasy VII is running around Midgar, right? And in the middle of the street, Cloud saves someone from getting hit by a car, and it's Johnny.
Okay.
And
good old Johnny.
And Cloud's like, what are you doing,
Wonderful
man?
Johnny.
Like, you just almost got hit by that car, as Cloud would of course say. And Johnny goes, I don't. Can you help me? I woke up with this spiral on my thumb, and I've lost all my memories. All I see is the spiral on my thumb. I don't know where I am. I don't know who you are. I don't know why you have a big sword on your back. It's kind of scary. What's going on?
20 seconds left.
And then he becomes a guest character for a little bit until you find a place with him that he recognizes as his apartment building, and then you bring him home, and you don't see him for a little while after that. So this is like way further in the game, right? You dropped him off at his apartment last time, and he's like he's gone or whatever. Maybe you forgot about him, but then he shows up again. And his entire hand is a drill now because of the spiral that was on his thumb. And he immediately runs up to Tifa and starts like talking to her, trying to like, whoa, yeah, my drill's pretty huge, right? Pretty impressive.
Could say it would pierce the heavens.
And exactly. And Cloud goes, what the heck are you talking about? And he just goes, man, you ever watch Gurren Lagann? I really like that show. Because they did a Attack on Top of Gurren Lagann tie-in, and Cloud with about the same cadence as the line he says when Tifa or Aerith like compliments him on his dress wearing beauty. He just says, "I hate Gurren Lagann," And then that actually triggers a fight with Johnny, where you have to fight him and his drill hand.
All right, you got to prove yourself better than Johnny.
Yeah.
All right. And for context, this character's name is Mithril Mike. If that name seems ridiculous, I want you to remember the main character of Final Fantasy VII is called Cloud Strife.
Mithril Mike. Okay.
All right. So Mithril Mike saunters up to the party. What is his starting point? Your time starts now.
So Cloud and his gaggle of buddies have to get into this facility for some reason, and this guy is like, "Hey, I have this Bane style thing around my mouth. They basically took my ability to speak, and now it's been completely replaced with this weird metal face diaper that I have on my face."
Okay.
How was he talking if they took away his ability to speak?
He says, "I will help you get into the facility. I'll be like an extra."
Hush.
Don't worry.
Hush.
Don't think about it too much.
Don't worry
I'll be
about
an
it.
extra
Don't
pair
worry
of,
about it.
I'll be an extra
Okay.
sword to the party and help you guys just like blow through these guys in order to get in there because I want my revengeance.
He wants revengeance. All right, I like it.
Yeah. And so
15 seconds.
afterwards, yep.
His
So
rising
Really
they
go
get
to
in
Metal Gear
and they
with
blow a
this.
bunch of stuff up,
Mm-hmm.
and then he begins to enact his revenge. But it turns out the guy that's running this facility is part of this ancient order of evil people that Cloud is going after, and he escapes. And Mithril Mike is like, "Yo, I will join you guys and help you on your adventure because it'll get me closer to this guy, and I could join your party, and so it's a lot safer to get to him that way."
All right, so you're saying he's a party
Bam.
member. Okay.
Sure. Why
All
not?
right, let's pull everyone else back in and resume our normal episode.
So we'll pick up right as he joins the group as they're going off and searching for something or other that I can't remember. And during their travels, the bridge from one town to another has been completely just demolished, and so they have to go through a cave. Yeah. And as they're in the cave, they're fighting all sorts of baddies, but they realize that this isn't just any regular cave. This is a whole laboratory where they exclusively develop and manufacture giant, hilarious metal chins, just like the one on our main character here. And so it was he that actually blew up the bridge and sidetracked the entire team just so that they would go through the cave, that they had no other choice. Because
What
this
a
is where he will get
twist.
his revenge
His revenge.
on the man that created them. But upon figuring out that he blew up the bridge, the entire team is just torn apart. And the man that he's come here to
10
fight
seconds.
has unfortunately escaped. And now the team is in ruins because they don't trust each other because Mithril Mike is kind of an asshole. So
Okay.
He's a hack fraud, is what he is.
He is a hack fraud. And with that, you guys are all caught up to the narrative of each of these side characters.
God.
So we're just going to go through in the order we've been doing it. Alex, you're going to be first and tell us the ending point. What is your last interaction after the demon clothes and the doctorate in fashion with Ibarella and Dr. Derrier?
Last interaction with them.
And you have 60 seconds. So,
I believe.
I don't really think it's anything going to be that major. You're just going to go through the clothing warehouse dungeon, and then I think afterwards, this from what very little I know of 14, this completely messes with its mechanics, but I'm still going with it. The dungeon is now converted into Ibarella's new store that she runs.
14 can do that. I can confirm there are instances where that kind of thing can happen.
Oh, then that absolutely happens, and she runs it either she does or the person with the doctorate in fashion does, but she becomes a new clothing vendor.
All right, is that it? That's the
Yeah.
end? Clothing vendor?
Yeah.
All right. Wonderful. You had 20-something seconds left, so...
Maybe it's anticlimactic, but hey, you get a new person to shop from.
You get a new,
True,
you get
true.
a new NPC.
Shopkeeper.
That's
All right, Brett, that means
Oh,
you're
boy.
next up on the docket with Johnny. I hope
The dramatic
you've
Johnny
got
finale.
the dramatic end for us ready.
What happened to
Absolutely.
his spiral?
The
I've
wonderful
got a
spiral.
tearjerker.
I can really tell by the fact that I can't see your eyes right
It's because I'm crying.
now. Oh, okay.
So
Gotta stay strong for the camera.
my time didn't already start, did it?
No, I'm starting it now.
Okay, good. All right. So last time you saw Johnny, you fought him to kind of just like prove that you were better than him, and he kind of was like he was in a rut, and you don't see him for a while until actually nearing the end of the game, and they're the Cloud and the party are trying to get to a place, and in front of them, flying down from the heavens with his one big wing, Sephiroth interrupts the party, and they engage in a fight, and it's not looking good. Cloud's party is being like brutalized by Sephiroth because he's Sephiroth, man. But then at
Yeah.
the last second to save the day, in comes Johnny with his giant drill hand, and he parries Sephiroth, and he holds him off for like a solid 20 seconds, and he shouts at everyone to go ahead, he'll hold them off. You made me learn something about my character, I guess.
Friendship.
Yes, a friendship and drill and piercing the heavens. And then
15 seconds
he and
left.
Sephiroth fight as the party leaves, and right as the party jumps off the building or whatever, Sephiroth kills him, but only after he earned his happiness, and
From
they
the
got
party.
away. Yes.
All right, great.
That's it.
Wonderful. Wyatt, you're our last in place to capstone Mithril Mike's story. What is his finale?
You said my trigger word, capstone.
Oh, great.
No.
Yeah, no. So the party in complete disarray after Mithril Mike just screwed everyone over, and they all hate each other. But Cloud is determined. He's like, I have to finish this quest that I'm on that I didn't specify in the other two parts, but we're just going to roll with it. And he's like, this has to end. This story has to end before it goes on too long. So he just walks up on his own. He's like, I'm going to go attack the Shinra building that's giving me all the exposition to the world at the end of the game, right to where the final boss is. And he's like, all right, I'm just me. It's just on my own, but I can do this. And then he starts fighting, and then just as he's about to lose, Mithril Mike just comes in for that save,
the clutch save,
the clutch save, and so they start fighting the boss together, and then the sound of their fight rings out to the rest of the city, and the other party members that I also didn't specify are like, oh my god, they need our help. So they run in, and this giant final fight. And Mithril Mike saves the day by taking off his face diaper and then putting it on the main boss guy, and then the main
final
boss
villain
guy, and then the main
Yes.
the main villain boss guy dies because
he can't breathe.
His face doesn't work with the Bane mask. And then Mithril Mike is like, "Yay, I saved the day!" And then he was like, "Wait, crap, I can't eat anymore." And then cut to black credits.
Oh my god. What an ending.
Wow, that is extremely impressive. I am very happy
the
with that
fans
ending.
Both
fans of the series may not appreciate some of the creative choices that were made, and I understand that, but me and the team, as in me and myself, just wanted to give you the best story possible. And we just wanted to please, we just wanted to make sure the fans were satisfied. So.
Writer's room of 20 people for just Mithril Mike.
All
right.
Gotta get it right.
Well, we've officially concluded all three of our stories. It's time to retire the finalist Final Fantasy Fantastical Championship Cup. I don't remember if that was the name I gave it last time, but it's the name we're using now.
It's the name, yeah.
I think inconsistency has been the running theme.
Oh yeah, no,
so
of course.
Fits.
Well, that's the running theme for the show. So,
I mean, sometimes we have faces and sometimes we don't.
I need to leave it up to you three. You three got to vote for the best story among the three. It's no longer about who's closest. We established that a long time ago, that you could go ridiculous with this, as the spiral finger has proven. So we're not going to go by who's closest. We're going to go by whose was the most fun. So, Brett, whose did you enjoy the most?
I mean,
you can vote for yourself if you want to.
Well, there's I'm just too humble for that, right?
Of
I
course.
couldn't possibly
I
do
can
that.
really tell.
But as much as I play every game that I play for fashion, for that character customization, for that brand new NPC with that whole new dungeon shop, I gotta give it to Mithra Mike's dramatic entrance at the end for the help of the
The
final
finale
boss.
of the game.
I just turning characters that are supposed to like each other against each other. That's like Captain America: Civil War. That's what I'm all about, man. Mithra Mike, give me exactly what I need with that
All right.
narrative.
Alex?
Oh, absolutely, Mithril Mike as well.
Okay.
I mean, look, we have a designer in here that specifically. Come on.
Really.
All right, Wyatt, are you gonna join the crowd and vote for yourself?
Man, y'all have morals. That's really cute. I'm voting for myself. No, I mean, honestly, the moment that I saw the spiral on the thumb, I was just instantly engaged in what was happening.
And you have personal
I-
experience with Johnny now as well.
I do. You
playing your
you play an entire 30-hour game with a character named Johnny. You think you know the man, and then you hear the true story from Brett, and you realize
You don't know anything at all.
that Johnny you
Cody
thought you
problem.
knew never really existed to begin with, and
No.
it was just very eye-opening.
Poetic.
The Johnny
you could say.
was the friends we made along the way.
That were
Most
then
certainly.
killed mercilessly by
Johnny is
Sephiroth.
about family at the end of the day.
Well,
God.
Wyatt, you have officially won the fantastical finalist final Fantastical Fantasy Challenge Championship Cup. Your award is literally nothing. So I hope
Absolutely
you
nothing.
are enjoying it very much. But with that, it's April Fool's Day, everyone. We realized I realized like 2 days ago that this is the podcast episode that's coming out on April Fool's Day. Or 2 days before April Fool's, but it's the one closest to April Fool's. Everyone gets what I'm talking about here. And, I've been asked by the other hosts consistently, are we doing anything for April Fool's? And my answer was always no. Because, of course, I thought we weren't, and then I realized this conveniently has fallen on the April Fool's Day episode completely unplanned. But that works because
Hey, we delay something
Incredible.
long enough.
we were actually the goal of this was never to compare them to the real stories, because obviously like Johnny's such a minor character in 7 that it's not that fun to compare and contrast. But what is fun is to reveal that this entire game was 2 truths and a lie the entire time, and one of these characters or character sets completely doesn't exist. So now I want to see if you guys have guessed which one doesn't. Brett, you're out of the game because you know. You were in on the joke, so you're out for now. Alex and Wyatt, which one of your characters is not real? See the thought process going with both of you.
Good. Yes, let them fight among themselves.
Wait,
I feel like we need some Jeopardy music going on.
wait a second.
Da-na-na-na. It's about
I
as
think
far as
Alex
I
had
can
a
get.
sudden revelation.
Any image can be faked on the internet.
All right,
I'm
Wyatt,
gonna
I'm
go
gonna ask you
equally
first
viable.
because
Okay,
I'll
I'm gonna
focus
go
on
with Alex's character. Does
All
not
right.
exist.
Now, Alex, would you like to do the honors?
All right, yeah, sure. I'm gonna go with Mithril Mike.
Yeah, Mithril Mike doesn't exist.
Oh
Nope.
no!
Mithra Mike is not real.
Not a real character at all.
Mike is not real at all.
Shuts.
Brett, would you like to tell us the origins of Mithril Mike?
So Mithra Mike is a classic character of jest in a different circle of friends. And one day we just decided to prey on some of ye poor fools who don't know a lot about Final Fantasy games and just talk about, oh man, I can't wait to see what they'll do with Mithra Mike in the next Final Fantasy VII remake game when the next disc comes out. And so to further this, I took an image of concept art of Cloud Strife and I traced over it. And that is the concept art for Mithril Mike that you were provided with, because he is not real, but in order to make him real, I made him. And I unfortunately lost the original image file and only had the one left over that I made like 240p. So that's why it looks like garbage. It's because the only picture I had left of it was that. So there you go. We made a whole like thing about him being like of his like style being like a reference to like a Final Fantasy 3 boss and everything, and how like he fights with the party or whatever and is only in like the Mithril caves, but none of that matters because you've been japed. He is not real.
See, Ryan was pulling some shenanigans behind the scenes.
Oh,
because I don't know if you guys heard about this on the podcast, but up and down, whenever we would talk about this, either on or off stream, Mike was like, "Wow, you got your version of the story is actually very similar to the Mithril Mike story in Final Fantasy."
I never said the Mithril Mike story. I said your version of the first arc was oddly close to one of the regular character stories in FF7, like the
But
regular
you made it
story.
seem like you were talking about.
Oh, of course I did, but I wasn't. I never
course.
said that it was Mithril Mike. I was like, it's pretty close to a character story.
This isn't water.
Absolute master of gaslighting.
This is not water, by the way.
Well, there was everyone's
You think
favorite
this
part.
is Wyatt?
Everyone's favorite part of a piece of media is always when the end reveal is that the villain was really the friend that you had all along.
Mhm.
And I thought today that I would just be revealing myself as a villain to Wyatt. But unfortunately, there was another dupe going on this entire time.
Oh,
This was not two truths and a lie. This was two lies and a truth. Alex,
Oh
your
my
characters
Lord.
were also fake.
I didn't even know.
I had the because it was down to me and Wyatt. I had the tiniest sneaking suspicion at the end. But you,
Oh my god.
absolute genius.
So,
Wow.
Ibarella and Dr. Derrier are two wonderful people in my free company in the game that were willing to help out. So, hi guys, if you're watching, but absolutely
My God.
wonderful job coming up with
I
these
have
fake
been
characters.
absolutely tricked, hoodwinked, and bamboozled.
I'm scared now. I feel like I'm next.
I was double gaslit.
We programmed Johnny
Ryan was
into
part of the
FF7 just to make you think he was real.
He was fake, so in order to make you think that he was real, we made him real.
We created the monster.
Oh my god! Wow.
So now that we've gone through our fair share of tomfoolery and whiplash,
You know what? This is just like my character arc. You've lied to the whole party, and we're being torn apart. We no longer trust each other. This is a situation of life imitating art, and it's crazy to
Well,
see.
Wyatt,
unfold.
it was-
I am a
it was
prophet.
great.
I knew this was going to happen.
it was great when you asked me like 2 weeks ago if we were doing an April Fool's thing, because I had to just be like, no, of course not. That would be dumb.
And why this is actually the best case scenario for you, because the original plan for this was for this to go on for as long as physically possible, because we were just like, oh, Wyatt doesn't care about Final Fantasy
But
VII
then you
at
started
all. But
playing
then you played,
7.
Yeah, then you played the game. We were like, well, I guess we just gotta tell him then.
We can't keep going with this.
You could have kept going though, because I would have been like, okay, well maybe he's not in the first part of remake.
Well, then
He's
what do we do
probably
when
in
the
some
second part
other-
starts coming around, or when you start to think about it?
Then you time it. Then
Then
you time it.
follow.
Then you time it where it's like, oh, we got to do the episode now that it's out. Like you could have dragged this out for a lot longer.
Well, hey, now you don't know if there's anything else.
Because God knows when remake part 2 comes out. Like given Square, it's gonna be another like 15 years. So like,
True.
you know.
Yeah, that is actually very true.
Right.
It's gonna be a couple years at least. But now that we've gone through the Mithril Mike and Final Fantasy XIV fake character whiplash, I hope you two are prepared, because we're going straight into our actual discussion topic for the episode, which is
Hooray.
sequels and follow-ups and spiritual successors of the good variety. Specifically the good variety right now. Well, the worsts could fill an entire episode on their own. I'm sure we could all talk about Duke Nukem Forever for an hour.
don't you mean we could talk about him for a long time?
You're right. You're right.
Wyatt?
You're correct.
All right.
Wyatt,
All right,
could you perhaps give me the GPS location to your current abode? I'd like to have a talk with you. With my hands.
with that's where we'll call Keanu Reeves in, you know?
Was the plan all along?
Yep. So we're gonna do this not the same format that we've been doing the past few times of just like one person at a time, but we're just gonna open the discussion floor to talk about general things. So the goal of this is to talk specifically about like systems and mechanics and general gameplay stuff, because we've been doing a lot of talk about narrative and whatnot and that kind of thing, but games also have gameplay. that is a real thing that
what?
most video games have.
What?
No, they don't, Ryan. Are
Most
you
video-
gaslighting me again?
I don't
take
trust
me
you
for a
anymore.
fool?
Any word that comes out of your mouth is immediately I don't trust it.
Look,
I'm sorry.
I know, I get it. But any games that have gameplay elements that are considered a successor. I'm also counting anything like if you want to bring up Lords of the Fallen as a good Dark Souls sequel, despite it not being made by the same company and it also being a terrible game, power to you, do it.
So like spiritual successors also count?
Yeah, spiritual successors.
Yes,
I'm including
yes.
basically anything that's like a follow-up, change, adaptation of an existing thing that is making it better for whatever reason. So I'll get us kickstarted with. We've talked a few times about the Nemesis system before in Shadow of War and Shadow of Mordor, but I don't think we've ever really talked specifically about like why it's better executed in Shadow of War and not Mordor. Because the thing, having gone back and playing a bit more of it recently, Shadow of War has just a much better grasp on like how often you need those interesting characters versus how often you need someone that like monologues for an entire minute before you start fighting them in the open scene. It's far rarer to get the monologue in War, which is nice, because I think that was a worry a lot of people had when they went into it of like, oh, every character is going to be monologuing at me. That's not how most of them are. That's just like 1 in 10 will probably be a monologuer, but it's pretty rare. They have more control over like the fine tune of the system, which I think makes it work quite a bit better. And it's also got all that really crazy back end shenanigans of generally only you're only going to encounter the same captain once per run, the same voice acting player once per save file, essentially. So long as you actually interacted with them. Like if they spawn in and then immediately get killed in the background, they can respawn in. But if like you get the crazy bard dude and interact with him and then he dies, you're likely not going to see another crazy bard dude because you killed him, and there's probably not many crazy bards wandering around in the game world of Lord of the Rings. So yeah, I think it's just some really nice advancements on that kind of system. It's the kind of gameplay things where like they're keeping the core intact, but they're just making it slightly better and a little bit more in depth and fixing some of the little kinks of the old system, which is very nice to see. Who else has got something? I'm sure you're all waiting. Oh wow!
I raised my
Raising
hand.
hands, Alex.
Oh,
It
well, we
works
have
now. We can see
benefit
it.
Alex, don't listen to these guys. That was adorable.
Be happy it wasn't a drill. Be happy you still have your hand.
Be happy you don't have a metal diaper attached.
No
to it.
spiral thumb.
Be happy you're
Crap,
real.
There's a spiral.
Oh no.
So the first one that came to mind, because of course it's me, and it's Uncharted 2. From what I remember, I mean, yeah, the gunplay and movement and stuff was tightened up a bit as far as the climbing
A
goes
lot.
and things like that. But wow, is the story of 2. I don't even know how to measure how much of an improvement it was over 1. It's just
Even the opening sequence, like we've talked about the opening kind of train sequence
Yeah.
before. Like that's immediately like
it's
it just
got
shows off.
trains, It's
Yeah.
got media res. It's perfect.
And I mean,
It's like the 4th episode in a row we've talked
you
about
guys are
the opening
mentioning
of Uncharted 2.
Uncharted 2's opening, but like Uncharted 1's not very fun to play.
No,
And
no, it's
Uncharted
not.
2 fixes
Yeah,
most
we are
of those
focusing on
issues.
mechanics.
It's really funny actually because I first got into this series. I got like the remastered trilogy for PS4, and that's where I first played it. And
it's really I was almost
Same here.
done. It's one of my favorite series of games ever, but I almost didn't play it because I thought that the first game was so bad. Like love this series, but I hate the first game with a passion. Like I think just the environments are really boring. The gunplay is like kind of clunky and awkward, and it's just like waves of enemies just that numbs your brain after like an hour. It was really climbing was just not functional.
But
Like
it's insane how much all of those aspects were improved in 2. And I mean, they've improved steadily in 3, and then once again massively in 4. But I mean, just
Yeah.
that was a huge and impressive jump for them to make.
Yeah, and I think it says a lot where there was so much
Like when you're
uh,
climbing in the game.
there's so many improvements from 1 to 2, and then 2 to 3 there were like not as many gameplay improvements because it didn't need fixing.
They got
at
the
time.
formula pretty correct with
Yeah.
2.
And then obviously, they changed it again with 4, but that's because it's a different
Yeah,
generation. of
Different
consoles.
generation,
Obviously
a lot more
things-
powerful. They can
With
do
the
more
grappling
open
hook.
stuff.
Yeah. No, I mean just and
I
like
still
the set
remember
pieces
like
were
the vehicle controls in 4 being like miles ahead, and I've only played a tiny bit of 4 because I haven't finished 2 and 3 yet. So
Oh yeah, that's
going
why I
through them,
love
but-
driving the Jeep around Madagascar, and especially the vehicle chase scene at the end, as opposed to the the jet skis in 1.
yeah, dude, the jet skis were probably my least favorite part of that game because they're
It was-
a great idea and then just so
Yeah.
unfun.
Yeah. And it is kind of I know we're not going to talk about narrative, but it's really funny just to see like Elena, who's just supposed to be this like kind of plucky reporter, just absolutely mowing down hundreds of people with a grenade launcher.
Like,
It was
in
just
2
so weird to watch.
in 2, oh my god, her coworker is killed in the line of duty.
Yep. And just the just it's hard to talk about like the feel of the controls when the person you're describing to hasn't played it. Like it's really difficult to describe what feels good and what doesn't feel good. But it just everything was clunky and off, and I felt like I was aiming everywhere except where the enemies were, just because it was just so off. And and again, it's hard to describe why, and I can't tell you technically what it was, but just there was something about it where just the aiming wasn't at all reliable, and so you were just kind of mashing the trigger and hoping the guys in front of you just fell over.
But you know what? I'd definitely give Uncharted 2 a thumbs up.
But I think a big thing that stands out to me between the two of them is that like
I saw it,
Uncharted
Alex.
1,
I saw that.
I
I
get
saw
it.
that.
I caught it just as you stopped. I wish I hadn't seen that. So yeah, Uncharted 1, I think enemy reactions are a huge part of like why combat is satisfying in Uncharted 2 onwards, and
Okay,
not
there
1.
Was there such thing as stealth in Uncharted 1?
Vaguely.
Vaguely, and then they had
You have to shoot everyone at a certain point,
Yeah.
but you can
Then they
stealth
had-
around beforehand.
the second section in Uncharted 2, which introduced more stealth, and then once again just
It's a lot more
massively refined in 4, where you can go in and out of stealth, or you can regain surprise and things like that.
Yeah, like when you
And
hit
when-
an enemy with a bullet, they react as if they've been hit by something, not necessarily
Yeah.
a bullet into, but like
Also,
they're visibly reacting.
I remember the enemies in 1 being like weirdly like bullet spongy for being
Yeah,
kind of supposed to be
that's
this
what-
realistic
kind of what I'm talking
blockbuster.
about.
The final boss, but
The final
Yeah.
boss is one of the most hated parts of that game. No spoilers for what it actually is, but you have to like there is one solution to the boss fight. You can only do it one way, and it is super
best-
frustrating.
The best way to describe it, it's a very sneakily disguised QTE. It
And-
tries to make you think it's not a QTE, but when you really look at it, it 100%
Yeah.
is.
and I think there are QTEs through the Uncharted series.
Oh, I mean, yeah, but when your
Not-
when your final boss is just basically a glorified QTE, especially compared to the 1 and 2. Again, not spoiling anything, but they were awesome. They were really cool mechanics. You were constantly moving around. It engaged all of your
It's
different systems. It was great.
it's a lot better. It's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination,
No,
but it's
no.
still a massive improvement from 1.
And it's interesting to see if you play every single Uncharted game, they completely change the way melee
combat works in every single one because they could never quite
Yeah.
get it down. I do think 4 is probably the best, but they just never found a system that like
Well,
worked.
in
It was
4, I think they have at the forefront. They have a lot of very almost 4 and Legacy. They have a lot of very choreographed personal scenes that have to do with close quarters fighting.
Mhm.
Try not to spoil things.
Yeah. No, it's a great it's such a great series to show like legitimate improvement every single game from a mechanics perspective. Like whether or not, because I know that the story in 3 and 4 is like people are kind of mixed on it, at least more mixed than like 2's, for example. But from a mechanics perspective, I feel like every single game had an improvement in almost every single area, and it's just you don't get that anymore. Where it's like, oh, a game like you play a sequel and it's like mechanically better in every single way. You don't get that anymore, and I feel like part of that is because Uncharted as a series doesn't nearly have as many like systems going on, and so that probably helps. But it's just nice to see improvement in every area from sequel to sequel.
Yeah, I think the only really menus you have in Uncharted are the journal, which is incredibly diegetic because you pull it out and you flip
Mhm.
through the pages.
And they
and
use
then,
they use the journal a lot better in every
yeah.
game as well.
And then the secret collection tab. Yeah, I really liked how
Mhm.
they used the journal in 4, where you could there were puzzles just in it that you could help
Yeah.
solve your way through.
Like the little ripped pieces of paper that you had to like put in the right. Yeah, that's cool.
All right, who else has got something ready and waiting? You made a noise, Brett.
We both. I think Wyatt and I both opened our mouths at
Well,
the same time.
I wanted you to go. I wanted you to go because you haven't talked in a minute. That was mostly Alex.
Well, because I haven't played. I haven't charted before, so I have not. I have
He's
not
been
done that.
Uncharted.
You're not experienced in the art of cartography.
You found the joke, Alex.
He's the last one of us. Sorry, that was a stretch. That was such a stretch. I'm sorry.
How could you?
I
It
know, I'm
was
sorry.
really far.
I know.
He's the second to last one of
Very
us.
naughty dog today, Wyatt. And speaking of dogs, there are a few dogs better than ones featured in games such as Okami, and I consider
Oh.
Okami to be like the best Zelda game, pretty much, because it's just kind of a
I'd agree.
culmination of it's the culmination of all the Zelda mechanics in a non-Zelda game. I think it came out in like 2006 or something. I secretly I have sunglasses on so you couldn't see me looking at my phone to make sure I got the release dates right. But it came out the same year as Twilight Princess did.
Extremely different as well. Like those are two
Yeah,
like opposite end of the spectrum games.
You
it's
have
opposite ends of
Brown
the.
Town and Cell Shaded Beauty.
But I think Twilight Princess is beautiful in its own way.
Oh,
Like
absolutely.
looks wise, but like they are like.
Please, you two. You're both pretty. Okay.
They are two sides of pretty much the same coin of like this very specific variety of action adventure. And of course, Zelda obviously being the like progenitor, it's primordial compared to Okami, but that
The
kind
old
of
god.
works in Okami's favor as it has all these things from both the 2D and the few 3D games that were out at that point to just kind of take from. And I think I'm not dissing the 3D Zeldas that I've played because
They're
I
all
love-
very good.
they're great games. People like playing them for a reason. I love Wind Waker. I love Twilight Princess, and I haven't played the two most important ones, unfortunately.
The sword is
But
interesting.
I just like compared to those two, Okami is like mechanically even it is a masterpiece. Like you have the length of gameplay if we're just going by like how much game you get, which isn't a mechanic, but it still stands to be mentioned. You basically get like 2.5 or 3 games in Okami. Like I got to like the ending point and I was like, okay, that was a great game. And it just kept going. And that happened again, and then it just kept going after that. And I was like, okay, sick.
Yeah, great.
But I love and there's probably examples of it earlier that I just haven't played or don't know of. But the attitude of open worldedness where like by the end of the game you have a big, huge open world that you can run through, and it's beautiful and everything. But it's kind of like Metroidvania'd off in the sections where like you need an ability to get through to this place, or you need to be able to jump high enough with the double jump to get to this place. That is just done perfectly in Okami. Like that pacing of mechanical progression and the abilities that the player has is awesome. And there's so many examples of that in the game. Like there's so many things to collect in terms of abilities. And if we're talking about you know kind of spiritual successors, I think this might be a little bit of a stretch, but I think this kind of fits in right at the end of my spiel here. But I would consider, in certain ways, I would consider Ghost of Tsushima a little bit of a spiritual successor to Okami in a lot of ways.
I
I
can
think they're
kind
pretty
of see what you're
similar
talking
games.
about. I would bet that was a pretty big inspiration, at least for like the haiku style stuff and the way it treats the world. But there's one thing about Okami that you didn't talk about, Brett, that I think deserves a lot of mentioning, which is the combat.
Yes.
I have played so many Zelda-likes that they. The weird thing is because Nintendo, when they're making Zelda games, doesn't do this. They don't make the Zelda games all play the same. Like it's rare to find a Zelda game with the same control scheme across them all. Like they all have Z targeting, but that's like one thing out of. Skyward Sword's got motion controls. Twilight Princess has the whole wolf aspect and everything, like swapping back and forth between them. Breath of the Wild is just completely different. But most Zelda-likes that I've played just ape Ocarina of Time's like targeting system in combat.
Yeah.
Okami does like none of it. Like nothing in Okami is similar to Zelda's combat at all. Like it's close. There's so little I can compare it to because it is so wholly unique. Of like the paintbrush that if you have the Switch version, you can like hold your Joy-Con as if it's a paintbrush in your hand and like paint the symbols for things, and it works. Cool. It's bonkers. It's the kind of thing that like I don't understand why more games won't try this like weird stuff of like. Well, I understand because it's really hard to do. It's not easy, and even in Okami, it can kind of break a lot. But most of the time it works, and most of the time it's super satisfying because of that.
Yeah. And that being said too, like it's a PS2 game originally, so the motion controls were like that's some Tron stuff, dude. We don't have anything like that. And it still felt good on a PS2 controller. But yeah, like even just like from a baseline comparing like combat from Zelda and Okami, like you have sure there's different pieces of equipment you can use, but there are like 3 different weapon types in Okami that you can equip, and you could have 2 at once. Isn't that crazy? And meanwhile, I was just like, you got the sword and you got the bow, and you occasionally throw a boomerang at people, and you can take I don't know, their arm off or something.
A dungeon.
You throw a bomb around. You got the hook shot. You got a lot of tools, but most of them aren't really combat relevant.
Exactly.
At least until
like
Breath
one
of the
of
Wild.
the most limited grappling hooks in all of gaming.
Hey, I love the hook shot. It's the jankiness is great.
Look, it's not the Final Fantasy VII remake grappling hook. Okay,
best grappling hook in a game.
We can't call it the worst grappling hook when that exists. Okay,
true.
I think you mean best combat grappling hook. Best grappling hook.
Oh, that's true. You can use it in combat. That's something it has over the Uncharted grappling hook.
All right, I can just feel Wyatt quaking in his boots after all
I'm steaming.
the Okami that just happened.
He's quaking.
I am steaming.
He's Quaker Oats.
All right, I've talked about Doom Eternal on the show a couple of times, and not everyone agrees with the changes that Doom Eternal made to combat. But personally, I think all those changes were for the better because it's actually a lot of small changes that makes a very different kind of like combat loop at the end of the day. And again, that's not gonna please everyone because it is different, and I totally get that. But for me, I found it way more engaging and a lot less monotonous. Because if there was one thing that I wasn't a huge fan of 2016, it was just how a lot of combat encounters start to feel the same after a while, and it's just combat encounter, and that was kind of it. Whereas here, the differences in combat and also what you do outside of combat makes it a lot more. There's a lot more variety to it, which I like. So the big change is, in comparison, like if you played 2016, you just have this big arsenal of guns, and it's like, okay, I want to use this one because this one's fun, and just go around and, rip and tear, all that good stuff. In Doom Eternal, it's completely different, where your entire arsenal is every gun is useful because every gun has its strengths and weaknesses against different things. So if you see that there's like cacodemons or barons of hell or whatever, you're going to be using very specific weapons to take them out because they have weaknesses based on the gun you're using. And so it just makes every single gun in your arsenal way more useful. And you're also switching weapons constantly, which just makes every combat encounter a lot more varied because you're not just sticking to the super shotgun like you did in 2016. And just, outside of combat, there's a lot of small things. I mean, they added a grappling hook to a shotgun.
I mean, why wouldn't you love that?
I mean, come on.
Of course.
If I could quote Donkey,
Geek
if I could quote Donkey, there's a grappling hook on a shotgun because this is a good video game. They added some really cool traversal stuff, and y'all know if you've watched the show before, I like me some good traversal stuff. There's like wall climbing, there's monkey bars, there's a dash. Gotta have a dash in every video game.
It's a requirement. Requirement.
But what I love too is how basically your enemies become your resources. So another big change is that there's a lot less health and ammo pickups, and your guns overall capacity for ammo is a lot lower than it was in 2016. And that's because they gave you some new tools such as like the blood punch, the flame belcher, and the chainsaw that all give you resources from enemies that you kill. So you basically have to use your enemies as like your resources. And it just makes for some really cool combat. So
Yeah, and it can be like from what I've seen you play and others play, it can be really easy to, not, shoot an enemy with the right gun at the right time, and you can end up out of resources really quickly with almost no way to bring them back. Like if you run out of stuff and then you didn't gas up your chainsaw enough that you can't get.
Your chainsaw, you can get additional gas for your chainsaw, but there's a certain amount of it where it like refuels on its own. So you always get one slash that will recharge, but you can get additional ones to help you out. There was never a moment for me. There were moments where like I'm low on resources, but it was never a moment of like, this feels unfair. Like it gets to a point where you're playing, like if you're playing, Resident Evil, for example, those are games where like you always have just enough ammo, but you're never overconfident going into an encounter. And that's what Doom can feel like sometimes, where it's like, oh, I'm low on stuff, but also you have your chainsaw, you have your flame belch or whatever, your blood punch, and that can all like give you back ammo and resources really, really quickly.
Yeah, the aggression is what fuels your rampage. Like you got to be on a rampage to keep it going.
That's what's so great. It's like 2016 did a decent job of like, if you're out of resources, the worst thing you can do is run away, which fits Doomguy's character really well, and it fits the type of game they're going for. And here they give you so many more options to give you those resources. And I think a lot of people that weren't a fan of it, I do think there are legitimately people that just weren't fans of it, but I think a lot of people didn't like it because they didn't understand how to use all of the different mechanics and systems.
Well, I actually want to kind of address this point because I was in a conversation with another friend recently about Doom Eternal specifically, and this is going to lead me really well into the next game I want to talk about, of just sequels that are fundamentally different from their last thing. So Doom Eternal is a game that, looking at the trailer and not looking into the gameplay itself of like the very specifics, you would probably think is just like Doom 2016 but more. But the way that combat works in Doom Eternal completely reworks how you play the game. You've got a very different flow of like, in Doom 2016, it plays very much like those classic boomer shooters of you have your toolkit, go blow things up. Like you don't need to keep track of what weapon you're using generally. There'll be better weapons for better situations, but you never really need to rely on like using a varied arsenal because some people don't enjoy that. Like some people want to do a shotgun only run. And that's what those games enable is that kind of like, if you want to set that challenge for yourself and go do a shotgun only run, you can. And Doom Eternal just becomes painful if you try to do that. Like, I think the thing with Doom Eternal is I would never say that it's worse than Doom 2016. In fact, I think Doom Eternal is a far better designed video game, but the end product I think is about the same quality level because Doom Eternal's combat system is great for people that like having to rotate through those different things, like Wyatt does, and like I do, where you want to have that rotation when you're going through and like making sure that you've got your resources and knowing that there's a specific counter to everything that you're doing. That's also not what boomer shooters were about or have ever been about. So I think the thing is, like, now you find that Doom Eternal is a worse Doom successor than a game like Dusk or a Medieval, which I've also been playing recently, which are like indie Doom clones, quote unquote clones, that have far more classic approaches of like, you've got like 9 weapons, go crazy, go murder rooms full of people, however you can, and that's fun in its own way. So I think it's just like 2 very different styles of fun. And I think that the question typically comes to, like, a fan of Doom 2016 is probably less likely to like Doom Eternal than a fan of other shooter games. Which
That's
is
true.
the weird thing of, like, it's a weird franchise that they did it to, in that it's the classic boomer shooter franchise is now just a different type of game, which isn't a bad thing. But speaking of another game that's a different type of game, y'all played Yakuza?
Oh boy.
Oh, wait,
Ryan.
hold on, wait, Ryan, you play Yakuza?
I played Yakuza. Did you not know that?
Incredible.
Never
Dame
would've
dane,
Is-
Wyatt.
Yet
How have we not
another
talked about this on the podcast yet?
yet another secret you've been keeping from us, you gaslighter.
Look, so Yakuza 7, or Yakuza Like a Dragon, as it's called in the West, is a very different type of game than every other Yakuza game before it. It's a turn-based JRPG, whereas all the others, the last like 8 games that have come out, are all beat-em-ups, 3D brawlers.
It's the finalist Final Fantasy.
It is the finalist Final Fantasy. And I think this is the moment where that discussion about, like, is a sequel appealing to its fan base correctly becomes really interesting, because I think Yakuza Like a Dragon's reception was overwhelmingly positive from almost everyone. There are very few fans of the franchise that played that and didn't like it. Even people like me who were super skeptical. I was like, in my Yakuza game, it's going to be a JRPG. I want to punch people.
Wow, you sound just like me.
Look, it's a valid opinion to have. And in playing it, I think you quickly learn that they've retained all the things people love about Yakuza. Like, even the animations are the combat animations will be familiar to some degree. They're not like recycling everything, but you'll know the move sets that people are using when they're fighting, and it fits because the characters of the games are very different types of people. And this is where that, like, the game's mechanics and narrative kind of become intertwined. Of the other Yakuza games are about Kiryu, and Kiryu is big strong man who punches people to solve problems. Violence is always the answer. Whereas Ichiban in Yakuza 7 is like a super different type of person who's also got this worldview that Kiryu would never have, of like, most of his group of friends are people that are homeless, or like ex-cops who were fired from the force, or a woman whose sister is a prostitute. Like, characters that Kiryu would never associate with. Which means when their job system is, you have to go to the job market and go into the building to get a job, and they're like, you're not qualified for this because you're a homeless person. And you have to be like, well, now I gotta go learn something at school, which is an actual thing in the game. You gotta take quizzes to get your certifications, and you come back and you've got more jobs that you can apply to, because you've learned more as a person and now have a certificate that says you're a better person. And the job
like
system
real
ends
life.
up working. It's this weird, like, approximation of real life if you're a person that is down on their luck, and like how difficult it can be to do basic things. Like, getting a job as a janitor is super difficult because you're homeless, and people don't tend to want to hire someone homeless, and that's the only way to get out of being homeless. So it's like it addresses that cycle in the narrative, but also in the gameplay, because like your classes are super different. You've got the whole thing of each of these classes has their own approach, and you start out with your standard like brawler class. It's just gonna go punching people like you would expect. And then you get to crazy stuff like a dude with an SMG that walks around. You get a character that is just a pop star who you can have do crazy abilities. But I think that over-the-topness is more core to what Yakuza was than the specific type of combat system. And I think that's why it works better than Doom Eternal's case of like changing the flow of it. The flow of Yakuza 7 is still the same. The whole game flow is very similar. It's just like how you get from point to point is a little bit different. Whereas Doom Eternal just changes how you kind of have to think about things. Yeah, I think it's a very unique set of approaches to game design.
Definitely, yeah.
All right, I've talked a lot. Someone else, please free me from this mortal coil. I know someone
Who's,
is ready. I heard noises from Alex and Brett.
Oh no. Sure. I was talking about spiritual successors. Got me in mind, and I guess it's mechanics. It's really more the background mechanics in a game, and I feel horrible because I've completely forgotten the name of this game.
How could you do this?
It's. I feel like it starts with a P. I
What
could
is it a spiritual
be incredibly wrong.
successor to?
It's the spiritual successor to Silent Hill that never came out.
PT.
Oh, PT.
PT.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
There's the P.
Even though it never came out, there's the playable demo, which
You can't play
playable.
anymore.
That is no longer playable.
Yeah, but while you could, the mechanic of that the infinite loop with the subtle changes, very well done.
Oh yeah. That whole demo is like mechanically it is incredible.
Prime
and
horror.
even
Like it's a
It's-
mechanics
yeah.
demo, it's a tech demo. It just
it's everything.
shines in all of them.
It is a Kojima is the smartest human being on planet Earth, and we just will never get to his level of understanding because like people didn't even figure out that it was like people didn't beat it and reveal the Silent Hill trailer at the end of it until the day before he was going to announce that haha you've been punked, this was a Silent Hill announcement the whole time. Like that is it's pretty crazy. I love I love and hate this damn thing because it's not real and it'll never come out. But like, just the fact that this demo exists, like you can see it bleed into like almost every single like indie horror game coming out, and even a lot of the double or triple A ones that are coming out. You can see
Like
PT's
Resident
blood in
Evil.
them.
I mean, it's a very,
It's
a very
even bled into movies too.
Even yeah, honestly,
That's true.
It's been I hesitate to say this a bit, but I would say that it is and can be genre defining.
yeah, no, definitely, because it's that good, even though it's not even a real game.
Yeah.
I will say it's a very misleading title. It's called Playable Teaser, but it's not playable.
I thought it was
It's
Player
such a
Tormentor.
misleading title. Like it's no longer playable, so you
Oh.
can't call it that anymore. That's just false.
Wyatt.
I was going to say Player Tormentor is it's a very accurate title, Wyatt. Or Please Turn Off.
That's all I have to. That's all I have to contribute to the
Pee in
conversation.
trousers.
Okay, well,
Let's
someone
keep
please
moving.
get
I
us
got
out of
one. I
here.
got one. I got one. We were talking about Zelda.
And go, and then I'll go after you.
Yeah, we were talking about Zelda. I want to talk about Breath of the Wild because I think it's a very interesting sequel. I mean, Zelda as a franchise is an interesting franchise because it's constantly, we were talking about it before, it constantly changes itself up with like every single release. There's no, with very few exceptions, there's like no continuing story. I mean, there is and there isn't.
There's
kinda
not.
depending on.
We just
Not
ignore
really.
that
I mean,
book.
the only part that I would
The
say that's like a
official
direct.
timeline.
I would only say like I think the only direct sequels are like Majora's Mask.
Majora's
is
Mask
like
is
a
Phantom
pretty-
Hourglass and
pretty-
Spirit Train are direct sequels.
Oh
but-
yeah.
Right, but for the most part, they're all disconnected. They all play very differently. And what I think is so interesting about Breath of the Wild is that, first of all, it is like it is unlike any Zelda. Like you can even if so, they're all different. You can still kind of seek out those like core mechanical pillars that make a Zelda game, whereas this one kind of removes them entirely. And what I think is so interesting, a lot of people were pointing this out when the game first came out, was that it's very reminiscent of the original like NES game in so many ways, and it almost feels like a remake of the original, but like if it was not a one-to-one remake, but it was like how would that game be made today, you know? And that's what I
love
find.
that they do it.
That's what I find so interesting about it, is that it's like the first game, the original was very open-ended. It really didn't tell you that much, and you just kind of had to figure things out on your own. And I feel like Breath of the Wild brings a lot of that kind of open-ended design back. But because it's so many years later, they just go like ham with it. They just go all the way because of their, because of the technology that we have now and the experience that a lot of the same designers have and stuff like that. It's such an interesting evolution of the original to where we are now and how they're so reminiscent in a lot of ways.
We have a sexy red fish man and a bird with an accordion, and the world's better for it.
I also think it's very interesting that, like, Breath of the Wild, you tend to find two opinions shared by the same people. Like, everyone who plays the game that played older Zeldas tends to think both of these things of, like, the gameplay is the best Zelda's ever been by, like, a large margin. Breath of the Wild is just such a joy to play all the time. And, like, I just went back and have been playing it recently, testing out some cool, like, things people have learned, like the bomb impact launches are just fun. But there's stuff in that game that, like, is so bonkers good that it elevates the entire experience past what it would otherwise be. Because, like, Breath of the Wild story is nothing that special, especially because most of it happened 100 years ago, and you're having that issue of, like, you're learning about events that you weren't involved in. There's the whole thing where, like, Link being a silent protagonist is kind of becoming more of an issue here, because you learn that Link does talk. If you read the logs, Link is not mute. He talks to Zelda. But then most of you just never hear him say anything for the entire game, because you listen to, like, a Zelda thing, and she's like, "Oh yeah, he does talk occasionally, but he's just, like, super introverted."
No, it's just Zelda's hearing voices. She's just crazy.
It's weird because you also then talk to all the crazy NPCs and whatnot. You have conversations with them, but they're just not voice acted, which is weird. So there's lots of, like, little things in Breath of the Wild that tend to irk people, and then the fact that, like, the 4 dungeons are the same thing 4 times. They're all really cool and really well designed, but, like, visually they're the same thing 4 times. Which is also the same thing 120 times as you do every one of the shrines, which are the exact same aesthetic. So yeah, I find it really interesting that there's 2 opinions of, like, people that played that game that love Zelda still tend to think it's, like, the best Zelda game, even if they think it did a lot of things poorly.
The evil banana ninja dungeon, I think, was a nice.
Yeah, that's, like, my favorite bit of the game because it's very different.
Yep. And it's interesting too, because a lot of people are like, "Oh, there's not enough, like, this doesn't feel enough like a Zelda game to me." But I think there's just as many people who will argue that, like, no, this is the most Zelda game that a Zelda game has been in a really long time.
Well, I think, like, everything aside from the fact that there's so little variation in dungeons, I would agree with that sentiment of, like, it's a very Zelda game, but it's just missing, like, a few things. Like, the hook shot would be such a fun thing to have in Breath of the Wild. They'd need to really do some crazy balancing with it, because it would break the climbing. But
there's the banana ninja dungeon. There's also the island where you lose all your gear.
Yeah, but that's also just, like, visually the same. Zelda's always been known for having those, like, wildly creative dungeon spaces of, like, the water temple. As much as people hate it, is still super unique and interesting.
It's different than the rest of the world,
And, like, I played Twilight Princess a little while ago, and playing through that game, like, outwardly you might think it's just, like, very gray and brown, but Twilight Princess has some astoundingly well-made areas, and I think, like, the best visual design of any Zelda game, because it's got so many cool areas, and, like, it feels like a landscape. Whereas I think Breath of the Wild it needed, like, a big city or something. It needed Hyrule to be there, or something else that was not these small towns, or more interactions.
You
to be in
technically
these
had
towns.
Hyrule Castle. I guess.
Exactly, but it was just, like, empty. There was so little, like, dragging you along, because, like, Twilight Princess has a lot of narrative. Like, a lot. There's, like, 40 hours worth of story in that game. And Breath of the Wild has, like, maybe 3 hours worth of story. If that, which I think is a little...
If you go for all the cutscenes.
Yeah, if you do all of it. Which, Breath of the Wild 2 is probably going to be different, because, you know, it's continuing. But I'm excited to see what that looks like.
The teaser with both of them in the cave.
Oh, yeah.
I'm waiting, Nintendo.
It's been, like, 2 years.
It is an interesting argument if people like, well, does it feel more like a Zelda game or doesn't it? Because I think what made the original so such a favorite game back in the day was that it was so open-ended, and it told you so little information, and there was a legitimate adventure to it. And as the series went along, there became a very set, like, structure and way that a Zelda game has to be. And so it became this thing where it was a lot less sort of open-ended. Like, there may have been, like, open areas and an open world, but you had to go to very specific locations in a very specific order, and I think that kind of started with Link to the Past and kind of onward. And so this is the first one that's really like broken the chains, and it's just like you can go to you can go to Gerudo Valley first, you can go to the mountain area first, you can go to the volcano. Like, it doesn't matter, you can do whatever order you want to do it in. And for a lot of people, that was what Zelda was for the longest time, and so that structure isn't there. And so it's either like you're a fan of that kind of structured gameplay that most of the series has had, or you're more of a fan of what the original had, which was very open ended. You just kind of have to figure things out for yourself. I don't know. It's an interesting back and forth, I guess.
Well, I think what kind of happened in this, what those people are talking about, they don't have an issue with the like doing it in whatever order. That's all fine, and like that's really good. And if I remember correctly, Twilight Princess and Wind Waker had things like that too, where you could do some dungeons in like whatever order you wanted. So did Ocarina of Time. Of you could do a couple of sequences of things in like whatever order. And like Wind Waker was also a super open game of like you literally go sailing and can go anywhere after the first island. So I don't think it's a case of like Zelda was super rigid. Twilight Princess kind of was like, that was Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword's thing of they were a little bit more railroady. But I think they took all that out for Breath of the Wild, which was probably a good thing. But they didn't add anything back. Like, they didn't add that narrative push of like the through line of characters that are supposed to guide you through to the end, and that you have like these cool interactions with the memorable merchants and whatnot.
I think the push for me personally, anyway, I think the push is that they always did a good job of putting story beats in interesting locations or things that you haven't seen before. So whatever in the environment would draw your eye towards something is where like, you know, where you can continue the story there. Like, oh, what's that big volcano? Like, what's over there? And there's a whole, you know, part of the story takes place on that volcano. So I think I think what they were trying to go for was like, again, they're really trying to push exploration and kind of figuring things out for yourself. And so I think they always tried to place story beats in the most interesting standout locations. And so I think
but like it's just missing those segments of like having a reason to go through a dungeon that is visually unique. Like, you have a reason to do the Divine Beasts, but it's not that compelling. Go ahead, Brett.
And I'm more on the probably more dramatically on the Ryan side of things than even Ryan is, because I've like that's the reason that I've played like 5 hours of the game and just haven't felt like doing more. Like, I got off the plateau. I went to see a new thing, and a rock came out of the ground and obliterated me, and I couldn't even touch it because I couldn't do enough damage, because I guess I went to the wrong place first, because there was nothing telling me that I couldn't go there. But like, I don't know. There's just not enough to pull me along. There's not enough motivation.
But wouldn't you rather have like experience the gameplay that tells you, oh, you're not ready for that, or would you just rather have an Ubisoft style thing where it's like, oh, you're heading into an area that's a little over level, you know, be careful? Or would you rather experience that in the gameplay and be like, oh, okay, obviously.
I mean, we can have both. Like, it's not a one or the other thing.
You can also just like have something really hard. Oh, I probably shouldn't be able to do this yet, and then like be able to do it anyway with your own skill, instead of realizing that, oh, I hit this thing, and the health circle.
I mean, you
go
can
down.
though. I mean, there are people who like as soon as they leave the Great Plateau, they can go right to the boss, and if you're good enough.
Yeah, if you're good enough, okay.
There's people who
play
beat
the game
Dark
with the
Souls
Guitar
by
Hero controller too.
swirling around 720 degrees every time and parrying behind the back every single enemy.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think it's just that like there's so little through line in Breath of the Wild unless you actively seek it out, and even when you actively seek it out, it kind of ends. Like, the issue with that whole separation thing is that if I go do the Gerudo stuff first, which I'm doing in my current playthrough, I have a lot of fun with the characters there and everything, and then they just stop. They just stop until the end of the game, which is going to be whenever I fight Ganon. And even then, there's nothing after that. The world just goes back to the state before you fought Ganon, which is like...
That's disappointing. No, that I completely agree with you on that front.
It just feels like these characters get no reward or no storyline, whereas a game like Wind Waker or Twilight Princess or Skyward Sword even had a lot of interesting characters, a lot of interesting development that happens, and none of that is stuff that you can't have with Breath of the Wild's openness.
With the main champions, it's just like, yeah, they're dead.
They're all dead.
No development.
One simple change could have made that, just make them not dead.
crazy how
I
that
think
works.
I think for me, what made me want to do the shrines is, first of all, they're fast travel spots, which makes getting around the world super easy, and so that was a good motivator for me. Second of all, you get what are they called, spirit orbs, right? Which you can then use to increase your health or your stamina. And so, because you want to be able to get around the world and you want to be able to fight more in combat, I think those are plenty. Uh, I think that's enough motivation for me from a gameplay perspective to be like,
I
no,
mean,
these
those are
are
all
things I want
gameplay
to seek out.
perspective. Like that's where the issue is. They're all gameplay related. And like I'm a systems designer. I love
Mhm.
gameplay. Gameplay's my thing. But if you don't have a narrative reason for you to be doing these things, like I think part of the issue is like you can go fight Ganon at the start and kill him. But you can also progress to the end. And there's this weird balance where like if you do all the storyline as if they kind of want you to in Breath of the Wild, you are going to be horrendously overpowered by the time you fight Ganon, like horrendously.
Yep,
And
I
they
waited too
also
long.
get rid of his health as
Yep,
well.
they
Yep.
make the fight so much easier. And I think it would have been you could have done something a little more interesting of like maybe doing the 4 divine beasts unlocks like a second phase of the fight or something that is more interesting. Like have a
Mhm.
bit of narrative locked behind doing the rest of the game, just as a
Mhm.
little drive to incentivize you.
I do agree. I think after the reason I haven't gone for a second playthrough is that for me, it's because I know how the world works now. There isn't that like mystery anymore. It makes it a lot less interesting for me to play. But not that it isn't a fun game to play on its own. But I think what I was really interested in from a narrative perspective was the entire game is just you like choosing when to fight the boss, and so the entire narrative is like doing these things to like slowly get you up
Procrastination.
to that power level, right? Where it's like, I don't think I'm ready yet, so I'm going to go off and do my own story and kind of do my own thing until I am ready. And I thought that was a really interesting, like very open-ended narrative kind of thing where
See,
it's like
that's where Breath of
there's
the
very
Wild
few
breaks for
things.
me, is because I agree with you that that's a really cool driving force until I beat Ganon, go back out in the world, start exploring, and run upon a camp of enemies that is far harder than Ganon could ever have been.
I completely agree with
That's
you
where,
there.
yeah. See, I think we're making the same point of like, I
Mhm.
still think Breath of the Wild is a 9 or a 10. Like, I think Breath of the Wild is one of those few games that is so good on the gameplay front, it can deserve a 10 out of 10 just because of how fun it is. Like, I've played so few games that are as fun as Breath of the Wild is. But then it's just lacking some Zelda things, and I'm really hoping the second brings, because Twilight Princess is super interesting because the story's super interesting. Like, it has a good narrative, and Breath of the Wild has a iffy to bad narrative for a lot of it, especially with the voice acting.
If it
Go ahead, Ash.
if it wasn't obvious from all the talking I do about Uncharted and things like that, I'm in games for the story
Mhm.
vast majority of the time first. And I keep on, suggesting to myself, like, oh, you should go back and play Breath of the Wild again. And I keep trying to. And I do it for maybe 30 minutes at a time because I've just done all the stuff that was of interest to me. And I
Mhm.
contemplate getting the DLC for it. I'm just like, no, it just really feels like more of the same.
I wasn't impressed by the DLC personally.
Yeah, DLC was kind of low effort, which is a shame because the motorcycle is really fun.
Yep.
But yeah, hey Brett, you had something ready.
I did.
Then we
And
popped
I almost
off.
forgot until then we went insane.
Go off, Queen.
So you may remember a while ago that I had finished a game called Wild Arms 3, and I started. It was like a very asymmetrical parabola where I was like, "This is cool cowboy game. This sucks."
Ooh.
Yep, I
And
do
I was
remember that
very
moment.
sad. Yeah, I was very sad because I just wanted good cool cowboy game. I have not played the first or the second Wild Arms, but just the other day, last week, I finished Wild Arms 5. And it is almost a completely different game mechanically, and it is so much better off for it. It is like, I know, like out of all the, because I'm going through playing all the JRPGs I missed from not giving a crap like a year ago. I like on paper, if we're going off of like probably actually the best critically like JRPG. Like Chrono Trigger is going to stay at the top, but I think my favorite is probably Little Wild Arms 5 on the PS2 that like two YouTubers with like 5 subscribers talk about. It's like because Wild Arms 3, like for an example of its gameplay, is just super like, not that there's anything wrong with it, but it's just like bare bones, just turn-based JRPG, goodness in some people's opinion, Wyatt badness. But it just depends if you like it or not. And I was fine with that. Like that's not the the problem. But like Wild Arms 5, like they have this like this hex grid of like a strategy element where you can move your characters between the things, the hexes on the grid, and they're all in different shapes for every different battle. And then the the elements of your attacks, all the magical attacks that you can get in the game are just like the crystal symbol for them is gray, which means that there's just like it'll do magic damage, but it won't do like fire or water or anything. You need to cast them while standing on like the water hex for them to do water damage. And sometimes the boss that is weak to water will be standing right smack in front of the water hex. So you need to use the guy that has the switch attack to teleport into his spot and switch him around. And it's like the amount of things that you can do are just like compared to the rather bare bones third one. And I know I'm like blabbing on about something that I'm the only one who has
I
played
care.
either example.
I care, Brett.
But it's legitimately, I was so surprised, like, because it really did just start out like I just want good cowboy game, and then the other one was so sad that maybe this one. It's 2 games later. People said the 4th one sucked. This one's got to be good, right? And like it's to the point where I don't know how the franchise like ended there, because that is probably like the best one. I'm going to be honest with you. It is incredible. I'm trying to think of more things that I can talk about that aren't like narrative or like super like super Brett specific things. But the one of the battles later in the game, you the build up for it is just like amazing. There's giant robots. It's just a bunch of giant robot punching each other, and then like an anime OP starts playing in the background with like J-pop.
Yes.
And then you fight this like huge monstrous thing while this 7-minute J-pop masterpiece is playing in the background. I'm just like, yes, the whole time.
It's pure adrenaline.
Absolutely, yeah. There was that moment later in the game, legitimately, like usually like video games or something like Okami that I mentioned before, that you stay with for such a long time and then it ends and it's like, it brings a tear to my eye. Like I almost started crying while playing Wild Arms 5 because it was so awesome, and I was like, this is the most impressive thing I've ever seen in my life. But yeah, in terms of like evolution of within the same franchise, like that is like from 0 to 100. Man, I don't know how people can even enjoy Wild Arms 3 when 5 exists. Like, jeez.
Is
it's
Wild
that much of an
Arms
improvement.
a like? Do you need to play the sequence of them to get them, or are they standalone?
Absolutely not. The only thing kind of like that with 5 is that I think they had a feeling that it would probably be the last one that they made. So there's cameos of characters from the previous games, but they're really just there like because they look cool and you can do a side quest with them. So you don't. It's a Final Fantasy thing where like the world's called Filgaia every time, and you have arms that are just guns. Yeah,
of course.
So you just play the 5th one and it'll be fine.
Yeah, actually, I think I got something that's interesting to talk about along Wild Arms 5, because it sounds like it's got a super interesting combat system that is not standard, which a lot of PS2 JRPGs are known for, is having those very inventive combat systems. And I want to talk about a game that is generally hailed as like one of the best JRPGs to have come out in the last few years, and say I don't think so. Just Dragon Quest XI. Dragon Quest XI is a great game. It's got a really good story. It's got combat. Because the combat in Dragon Quest XI is the same as the combat in every other Dragon Quest, basically. It is select your attack, do the attack. You can level up on a grid. It's all the things you expect from a JRPG. And a lot
Play
of them
it
are
from-
very
From that
refined.
5-second description.
Oh yeah, a
Like,
lot of
play
them
it-
are very refined. Go ahead, Alex.
Play a Dragon Quest character in Smash, and it's the same experience.
Exactly. It's the same thing. Yeah, it's wild because people like hail that game for its gameplay, and I think if you want to see turn-based done in a really interesting way, Persona and Shin Megami Tensei are like the games that are doing that. Yakuza 7 is doing turn-based gameplay in a very unique way. It's still pretty basic, but it's a little bit more unique than what Dragon Quest 11 has. And Dragon Quest 11 is great. Like, it's a fantastic game that I finished because the story is really good. The gameplay is good enough that you're going to want to finish the game when you're playing it. But it's so like innocent. It doesn't do anything unique or interesting or have any of those moments where you're like, oh, this is a really cool combo I can do. And I think the biggest detractor from that is the fact that the bosses are basically always immune to almost every status effect. And this is the most annoying thing to me in like any JRPG, and a lot of them do it, where a boss will just be immune to everything. So the only strategy is really either buff yourself enough so you don't die, or kill the boss fast enough that they don't kill you.
Yeah.
That's the worst version of a difficulty curve.
Exactly. It's like
Exactly.
it's not even a difficulty curve. It's just like there's no puzzle element to the fight, which is what JRPGs are often known for.
Mhm.
And Dragon Quest has a few great fights of like the bosses aren't immune to things. You can actually like use your character builds to do interesting things. But a lot of the time, those fights just boil down to let me hit you harder than you're hitting me, or heal through
And of
everything
course,
you're doing.
If you look at what you're doing on the controller, it's just pressing the same
It's
button over and over
D-pad,
again because you're doing the
just press
same
the
menu
button.
attack. Ugh,
Like, say what we
yeah.
will about Final Fantasy XII's gambits, but they're more interesting.
and that's saying something because you don't have to press any buttons.
You don't press any buttons, but at least it's unique.
Yes, this is true.
And I want to make it clear, Dragon Quest XI is a great game. The narrative is absolutely phenomenal. But there are things like the music. As you're saying, the JRPG theme that pops up in Wild Arms 5.
Yeah.
There are other games that do that, like Final Fantasy XIV. Final Fantasy XIII has a banging soundtrack. It's one of the only good parts of that
dude.
game.
Yeah.
It's so good. Dragon Quest XI has MIDI music, at least the original release. They fixed it in the Switch version and the newer releases. They had a MIDI music of orchestral themes, and it's awful. It's like legitimately awful, and it's the
Why
only
would you
combat
do that?
theme. There's like only 3 combat themes in the entire game.
That sucks.
I
It drives me
hydrate to forget.
insane. And apparently there was a story behind it of like the dude making it had like a problem with the game, that like the composer like didn't like the game or something, and not like because the game was bad or anything, but there's some weird reasons of him. It was like a Kojima versus Konami thing of the company just didn't like him or something.
Weird.
And so the narrative or the music was just kind of phoned in, which is a shame because like the orchestral versions are far better, far more interesting.
Of
but,
course, yeah.
Man, I wish there was something aside from just the boom, 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 like Dragon Quest music that always Dragon Quest has.
That's so weird because like PS2 JRPGs will remain part of this conversation until the day that I die. But like you can look back at like PS1 and PS2 JRPGs soundtrack specifically and be like, sometimes this is really good for the time because they're like pushing what you could possibly fit on a PS1 disc that will come out of
Yeah.
it without making the poor little thing explode. And like, if that's MIDIs, then sure, like you can, and you have artists like working around that really well. But like Wild Arms 5, there are songs that I am pretty sure that they just got a full orchestra in to do the battle theme, and to hear that like something like Dragon Quest 11, like that is a high profile
Yep.
release of a game that has just gotten midis in it.
That
That
is
is
Square
so
Enix backed
weird.
release, which is even
So
weirder because Square
weird.
Enix is usually so good about that with Final Fantasy. Of like
Yeah.
everything is orchestra, everything's great. They have like a standby Final Fantasy symphonic orchestra that goes around and tours.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
And even from what I understand, like to like Final Fantasy for us in the West is Dragon Quest for the people in Japan, right? Isn't Dragon Quest like way bigger in Japan than it is for us here?
It's both. So Final Fantasy is still super popular, but I think the
Well,
most
yeah, I would
popular
imagine.
Final Fantasy games in Japan are the MMOs.
That makes
Both of
sense.
them. in like the original games, whereas Dragon Quest is a little bit more mass appeal. Because like Dragon Quest is super cute, and a lot of the Japanese cultural aesthetic likes that. It's a very like cute enemy design. And, like that's something that Dragon Quest does great. Is like the enemy designs are unlike anything you will see in other games. You might hate them, but they are at least different.
It's mass appeal because it hasn't changed a bit since it first came out.
Toriyama's art style.
Don't make fun of Toriyama. He's doing his best, which is the same that he's always been doing.
Dragon Quest XI has one of the, I think, the ugliest main party characters in a game that I also still simultaneously love the look of. Like, they're ugly because he's just super long. Like, his face is like that big. It's just very long. I'll send you a picture after the podcast, but it's wild. It's insane. Good game, horrid music, and needs more variation. All right, I feel like Brett and I have been domineering the JRPG train, the spirit train of JRPGs. What do you two got?
You got one, Alex?
Oh God, number 3.
I can go if you need a minute.
Which one of you will suplex the JRPG train?
All right. Well, I would like to talk about something that I never really talk about. You know, it may come as a shock to you guys, but I do play the occasional first-person shooter. I know. Shocker.
I thought only Ben did that.
That's crazy.
But while I've been bringing up Doom and id Software, I do also want to mention Wolfenstein, which the new Wolfenstein series by Machine Games. To be honest with you, I kind of prefer those over Doom personally, just because it has a bigger emphasis on narrative. I think obviously Doom has very different aspirations.
And I mean, any game where you shoot Nazis, that's just fun.
Of course, yeah.
Especially if you get to dual wield assault rifles that have rocket launchers attached to them. I mean, it really doesn't get much better than that. But no, I think it's such, because I feel like Doom, especially Doom 2016, was such a pure like return to what Doom was when it first came out. Whereas I feel like Wolfenstein is very faithful to the old games, but it's also incredibly different at the same time. It's very bizarre because Wolfenstein, another classic sort of boomer shooter, you have sort of, open-ended levels. You kind of have to figure out where to go. You have to, find secret passageways and ammo, health, all that stuff. And this game is far more linear. I wouldn't say it's like, a corridor shooter, because there's definitely a lot of different ways to go about combat encounters and that sort of thing. That's very like well done linear level design, but it's definitely more condensed than like classic Wolfenstein is. But I just think it's such an interesting move for them to be like, no, we're not going to set it in classic World War II. We're going to set it in like Nazis won World War II because they have this crazy scientist doing this futuristic technology. We're going to have it take place in the was it the 60s, I think. And that's such a jump from what you would expect a spiritual reboot or successor to Wolfenstein to be like. And I think it was such an interesting move. I think it's exactly what that franchise needed for it to kind of stand out. And I think it's just so, even though the story takes itself seriously, the gameplay is so over the top and crazy. The best way to describe playing it is it's like playing a Tarantino movie. That's what I've said every time. It feels so much like that. It's so insanely over the top, but it also has a lot of really emotional things to cling on to, which makes the gore that much more like impactful or exciting.
When a stealth kill, when what's considered a stealth kill is hacking apart someone's body with a hand axe, that's a Tarantino film.
Yeah, and it does such a good job of like, I was so impressed with the level design, because a lot of people are like, oh, if you have linear level design, then the amount of interesting things you can do with it compared to like more open-ended level design, you're more restricted in some aspects. But I think they do such a good job of taking a space that seems relatively small, and they use so much of it. They have so many interesting like vents to go down and like secret rooms, and it's really highly replayable, at least for me, because there's so many things I missed the first time around. It does such a good job of like having a really detailed linear level design. That's what was really impressive about it to me.
And just fun weapons. That
Oh god,
always.
the weapons.
There's a sniper rifle that you can mod that like turns into a laser assault rifle. It's so cool.
Oh, Wolfenstein's weapons are just so much fun because they're very
Bonkers.
unique, but they're also they're twists on things that exist in other games that are unique, which is always nice to see. Like the Titanfall approach of a weapon is just like almost what you think it is, and then suddenly it's very different.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
there's a lot of bonkers stuff that they do. Like if an enemy comes up to a melee attack, you can get into this moment where you're both like gripping each other and you're both just stabbing each other incessantly. It's hilarious, but
Hell
it's
yeah.
like really intense in the moment, and it's God, I love those games so much.
We're going to be talking about Titanfall 2 for this spot.
I've talked about it a lot, so I was waiting to see if someone else was going to bring it up.
I don't have enough.
It's not
experience.
over yet.
I mean, we're getting close. We got about 20 minutes at the max. So anything that we're forgetting, we better bring it up.
My last example, because I've managed to pull one out, is I think once again this is going to be a situation where only Ryan and I can talk about it. Evoland and Evoland 2.
Ooh.
Well, Evoland 2 specifically. It because once again massively improves on the story that's there. Because Evoland 1 is more like a proof of concept. Where
Evoland
like,
1
yes,
is like a love letter to RPGs.
Yeah, especially Final Fantasy 7, because it has very much that it evolves into that graphical style at the end, and that's what essentially the story is. For it essentially takes one of the side stories, really.
Yeah,
I think.
Because I mean, Evoland 1 is only a few hours long, right? It's not.
Yeah.
If I remember from when I played it, it only took like 6 hours or so, I think, to beat the game.
Yeah.
Which is refreshing because it's cheap. It's not an expensive game, but.
And then, for Evoland 2, for a playthrough that I was by no means trying to complete everything in, it was about 30 hours. And then because in Evoland 1, you're just moving forward through graphical progression. Like you steadily get, so there's just 1D. Then you move into 2D, with where you can only move there and there, or like left and right, and it's just the one monotone, like a non-backlit Game Boy screen aesthetic, things like that.
Yeah.
In Evoland 2, you can move, and there's story reasons for it. You can move back and forth between.
Dude, I love when you can say that there are story reasons for you to like demake and remake the art style to different eras of game.
It's like it's Pokemon pixelization, where you're tiny little self. 36-bit, then I think
32-bit.
pixelization. 32-bit, yeah. And then and then 3D models. For the three main time zones that I think you can travel between. And then there's once again the love for all the different mini games that you can find, traversing an overworld that changes alongside. There's so many characters that you run into as well. There's a party system for fighting. You run into a bunch of different combat styles. They don't do turn-based the entire time, I think, at the end, like they did at the end of Evoland 1. That's just for one specific section. Like there's a Guitar Hero section as a boss fight. There's an entire island where you play it like it's a Fire Emblem game. It's so fun how it handles stuff. And then it also does Hearthstone in a way that I actually enjoy playing it for once.
I mean, hey, that's always great.
Achievement.
I don't know. Evoland is just a super cute game, and they came out with a Legendary Edition that has 2 bundled, and I haven't played 2 yet, so I want to give that a run through at some point. Especially because I think it's on Switch now, which is a great console for that.
It is.
Yeah, those are wonderful little games. Evoland 1 was one of the most fun games I played in the year it came out, I think. It was just it knew what it was, and it was contained to a nice like level of content where they knew you would not get bored because you're constantly going through to the next era at just the right time for the mechanics to never get boring.
Really well paced.
Yeah.
You know what I'd liken it to? While 1 is a love letter to 7 and games like that, 2 I think is a love letter to Chrono Trigger.
I mean,
Not-
2, from what it sounds like, has more of a legitimate like through line of narrative and like
Yeah,
proper RPG structure, whereas 1 was more of just like very strictly a love letter to like old school Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest of like that era of gaming, just like showing like almost a virtual museum of all the different elements. Yeah, super cool games.
Oh, there's also a side-scrolling beat 'em up part.
Oh, I forgot about that. That's also very fun. But yeah, I'm gonna yoink the next one because I think I'm not gonna talk for very long about this because we're doing a whole episode soon about a very specific set of games that I think Brett is gonna hear the names of and just kind of implode. Hopefully, Cloud can keep you.
You will be safe.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
That's Ace Combat 7 and Project Wingman. But specifically,
Oh boy, the glasses are off.
they've
Oh,
come
no.
off. He's hindered final boss mode.
It's so bright actually. I like flashbang myself.
His
Alright,
eyes
continue.
are the same as Claude's.
But I want to specifically shout out those two, and I'll talk a lot more about this when the plane episode comes out sometime
Yes.
next week.
Mhm.
Actually, it's probably going to show up on Anchor the week after because we're recording it on Friday, so that's coming out soon. But I think it's a perfect example of how two games that are trying to do similar things can coexist perfectly because they are both different enough in how they're going about everything to be completely valid. Like, Ace Combat 7 plays extremely differently from Project Wingman, despite being essentially trying to do the same thing. And they're both getting to that same endpoint of, like, fun playing game. But they do it very different ways, which I just love that exists. Like, Wingman emphasizes your aiming and is a lot more arcadey and feeling, whereas 7 is just much more real plane physics applied to an arcade type of game, which is an interesting approach that makes it a lot harder to do things like aim a gun, but a lot more satisfying to shoot people with masses of missiles. So, they're just very good
Of course.
takes on two different sides of the same coin.
It's and also like mission variety. Like you'd think they'd be pretty similar, but I think that difference in the flight model is kind of it's conducive to making missions differently. Because like in the arcadey nature that is Project Wingman, you have the classic Ace Combat fly through small hallway things as little side things that you can do in levels that aren't like the main thing that you could be doing. But in Ace Combat 7, of course, because you have the much harder to handle and overall like heavier flight model, like of course for like you're going to be sent through a barely flyable highway tunnel with closing doors and having to switch tunnels and stuff because that's just
And also, Ace
that's-
Combat 7
yeah,
has
what it do.
checkpoints, and Project Wingman does
Yes.
not. So
yes.
that would be very frustrating in Project Wingman if you had to play a 20-minute level and get to the end to do a little fly through, and you crash and have to do the entire thing again.
Ooh.
I would love that. It
Dude.
would be great. Very Ace Combat 0.
Mm.
Yeah, just great games. All right, I can feel the steam emanating from the right side of our little set right now. What have you two got cooking over there?
Hey, what you want to talk about Titanfall 2?
Titanfall 2, I've never heard of her.
Oh, well, that's kind of awkward. We should just end now. I
Oh.
think we should just end it early.
Oh, Titanfall 2. Oh!
You were thinking of a different
okay.
TF2.
Okay.
You were thinking of
okay.
Transformers
I was thinking
2.
of I was thinking
Oh.
of a different Titanfall 2. Excuse me.
Wyatt, I will throttle you.
Which I think you might not be on the same level of appreciation of this absolute gem as I am, but I consider this to be probably the best multiplayer shooter of all time. I like
High
it's up there.
praise.
More so than Destiny?
everything's a more fun
Oof.
multiplayer shooter than Destiny is, Alex.
I mean, look,
But-
it's definitely I've played so many that it's hard for me to pick a personal favorite because I have so many good memories with all of them.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it's really hard to pick a favorite. But it's definitely up there for me. I mean, it's a lot like what I was saying with Doom Eternal personally, where I feel like everything was improved.
Absolutely, yeah.
There are things that I think were omitted. Like I kind of missed hackable towers and that kind of thing. But in the grand scheme of things, those are things that I can forgive because everything else is improved.
Yeah, exactly.
The fact that there's a single player campaign at all and that it's one of the best FPS campaigns I've ever played.
Yeah.
To just the one thing everyone was asking for. Oh, we want more pilot customization.
There you go.
Bam.
Have 5,000 different camos for your gun, your Titan, and your Titan's gun.
that
Have
you can
fun.
unlock by playing the game. And we're not
Crazy.
gonna
Groundbreaking idea.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is there are microtransactions that don't make me mad whenever I look at them because they're totally reasonable, and also you can 100% ignore them and not feel like you're missing out on a single thing. It's great. It's great.
In fact, even if you buy them, it just becomes more confusing because you can like early unlock things like the Titans, but you earn Titans at a good rate anyway.
Exactly, yeah.
And if you unlock them all at the start, you're not going to know what you're doing because you have to learn one first. So what's the point?
Exactly.
It's great.
Yeah, it's an example of a sequel where there aren't, I mean, other than the single player campaign, there aren't a lot of like major changes, but it's a lot of small tweaks that when you play it, you can just feel the difference. Like the level design is tweaked and it seems very similar on the outside, but it's actually very different in a lot of ways. The addition of more Titans and just the more, like I said, more customization, more sandbox. There's nothing in it that was added that I was not, that I was like, oh, we could have done without this. As much as I'll praise Doom Eternal, we could have done without the Marauder, and I hate him, and he's the worst, and he's stupid, and I hate him. But with Titanfall 2, it's like every edition, it's like there's nothing to complain about here.
And like
perfect sequel.
Speaking of sequels and gameplay, Titanfall 2 has a campaign.
It's we really have to emphasize how much of an improvement this is over the original that had
nothing.
A campaign,
which was a tutorial. It was a tutorial for the multiplayer. That was it.
In multiplayer for some reason.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And again, like I said, not just it's here, I guess. Like we have a single player campaign, please stop complaining about it. No, it's one of my favorite FPS campaigns that I've ever played.
Oh yeah.
And every level has a great I don't even want to call it gimmick because I feel like doing it a disservice. Every level has a great central mechanic that it's designed around.
Okay, what is that one, without saying the mechanic? What is that one?
Do we want to hold on? Do we want to talk about that one level? Do we want to spoil it? Because I don't even want to talk about that level.
Okay.
I don't even want to
spoil it. We'll just say there's one specific level that we have all seen before that is absolutely phenomenal.
It will blow your mind.
And we don't want to spoil it. Because
that
campaign's short.
Go ahead.
Everyone talked at once.
No, go ahead, Brett. Go ahead.
Yep.
If you go in just expecting like regular old Rudy Tooty point and shooting, and you jump around sometimes, like you will be absolutely floored by not only the one level that we are talking about, but even when they make you jump around sometimes, it's like brain get big.
Yeah.
It's also it's a great example of like it's a great example too of like I know we're trying to stay away from narrative, but it also has to do with gameplay. How it creates this bond between you and your Titan through the gameplay, not just through the dialogue and the story, but through gameplay as well. Because they make it very clear, like there are certain sections where you can't be without your Titan, and that makes you appreciate your Titan more. But there are also sections where you need to help your Titan. And so it's this great back and forth of like you two have this relationship, this codependent relationship. And it does a great job of creating that bond just through playing the game.
And phenomenal level design. Like we can't emphasize that enough. Level design is like so core to Titanfall 2.
Every level is very distinct. Every level has like a nice, unique setting. Every level has like a different just
and
philosophy.
None of them overstay their welcome. That's like the big thing.
That's the biggest thing. I will never ever. There were so many people when that game initially came out, they were like, "Oh, the campaign's too short," and I just could not disagree more because it's a perfect example of they introduced this really cool thing, and as soon as they run out of interesting ideas, they stop there because they don't want to wear it out. They don't want it to get
Titanfall
old. They
2
stop
doesn't
it-
need to be an RPG.
Yeah, yeah. Please no.
No, it's brevity is the soul of wit, which is a classic quote, and I think it doesn't. I think it applies here perfectly. It ends exactly when it needs to. Every level ends exactly when it needs to. It feels like it's the perfect length. It's so well paced.
I mean, the argument that the campaign is too short would have legs if the game was single player only, and like
Yeah,
you get this like 8-10 hour campaign for $60, and you're like, huh, that was a little not much for my.
Yeah.
I feel a little underfed with this small size here. But then you've got the entirety of the multiplayer, which, as Brett and White have already said, is like one of the best multiplayer experiences out there. And it's Titanfall 2 is still kicking really strongly, especially with the Game Pass EA Play inclusion now. I believe it has crossplay as well. So
The Steam release helped a lot as well.
Steam release, it's now on Game Pass. EA Play has it. It's dirt cheap constantly. So yeah, great time to jump into Titanfall 2 and play through that level we're talking about on your own.
The only problem the game has, and a lot of games that are a little bit older have this problem, most of the people you're going to run into have been playing it nonstop since it came out, and they will crush you. No remorse. It is it can be very difficult to get into because it has quite a bit of a learning curve to it. And those people that you're going up against have been playing it since the day the first game came out, and no remorse. They will destroy you.
It's these are people that can launch themselves across an entire map with a single grappling hook grapple to like one building in the middle, and they'll just be behind you the second that they spawn in.
Yep.
But that being said, it is still very fun.
Yeah, wonderful game. All right. So with that, we've hit the end of our sequel discussion, at least for this week. Because guess what? This is the final episode of Double On Radio Season 1. We're coming back next week with Season 2. And what does that mean? Absolutely nothing. Nothing is changing whatsoever. I can't emphasize that enough. Nothing will be different.
See, I don't trust you anymore, Ryan. I don't believe you.
Yeah, the background's going to be blue instead of orange next time.
The Dark Brett storyline is Season 3.
Yeah.
We have 3 seasons of this show and a movie.
Claude's Betrayal is coming up soon, so keep an eye out for that. Yeah, the show's going to be back as normal. We're separating it into seasons on the back end. I don't actually know if that's going to make a difference in most podcasting platforms. I don't think so. But it makes it cleaner for organization on our end. And yeah, if you've been listening this entire time, we could have said this at the start, the entire... there's a visual component to the show now. We've got our cameras on. We showed some video earlier. We've got some nice layouts now. We can do things like if I swap to this one, we could react. We could react to live events now. We have the power to like show video and do things in that layout. So yeah, we've got some fun stuff that we can do now, which is always great.
Cool.
As always.
We'll
see you next week. Well, we gotta close the show Tuesday 7 a.m. That's when the thing is out on the platform of your choosing and YouTube now, because YouTube has the video. And other things don't. You're not missing much though. So.
Ouch. Wow. Again, we have Claude. They are missing out on something.
You're missing out this episode. You are definitely missing out if you don't watch this episode on video.
Uh-oh.